Welcome back to the Out of Spec podcast. I am your host, Francie, and today we are diving a bit deep into the technology of plugging in your EV and having it immediately charge at a EV charger. Revolutionary, I know. Joining me today is Glen Stancil, CEO of Merge Electric Fleet Solutions, who is very well versed in charging communications within pretty extensive background in the industry that he will describe later on in today's episode. And in this episode, we're going to be breaking down the differences between plug and charge and auto charge, two innovative plug in access methods that are designed to simplify and secure the EV charging process, as well as the payment of charging on public chargers or also private, but just being able to plug in your car and it charges and it gets paid for simply without you having to interact with a screen or an app. Because the main thing we care about as EV drivers, fleet operators, whatever you might be, is that we can have that EV pull up to a charging station, be plugged in, and get the charge that we deserve and that we pay for. If I never had to interact with a screen or an app again to get my car charged, that would be pretty great. I'm sure that there are some Tesla drivers listening who might be rolling their eyes as I'm saying this because they've had that for years on the supercharger network. And I know, but that's just not the case for CCS drivers in the US. We'll explore exactly what happens behind each method, plug and charge versus auto charge, the benefits for drivers, for fleets, for the charge point operators themselves, automakers as well, and discuss how these technologies, where exactly we are with both, and also how they're kind of revolutionizing the EV landscape and what role they're playing at this point in time, because they might not be the forever solution. I wouldn't be surprised. By the end of this episode, hopefully, you'll be asking yourself more about how the convenience of automated charging could be the next big leap in making electric mobility a whole lot simpler. Maybe you'll be asking, how will this affect the current stakeholders? Maybe you don't care about this as long as you pull up to a charger that works, that is available, and that lets you simply plug in and immediately begin charging. All right, time to bring Glen Stancil into the conversation. Remember, if you find this conversation interesting, share out this episode to your electric community. Okay, let's plug in. This episode is made possible by the support we get from Fort Collins Kia. If you are in the market for any electric Kia, not only do they never add market adjustments, they will deliver your car to you anywhere in the 48 contiguous states for out-of-spec viewers. More information in the link in the show notes. All right, folks. Like I said today, I am lucky enough to be joined by Glen Stancil, CEO of Merge for short, Merge Electric Fleet Solutions for long, where you all help companies electrify their fleets. So it is a absolute pleasure to have you here today. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, Francie. Great to have you.
Can we start with an introduction to you, Glen? What's your
Sure.
background? How did you end up as CEO for Merge and with this well-founded electric vehicle knowledge that you are going to share with us today?
Yeah, happy to talk about that. My academic background's electrical engineering, although it was more of a focus on microelectronics than power at the time. I've spent about 30 years in the energy industry overall, with about 25 of those in power specifically, and then within those 25 years, about 15 years in EV charging. Started with a good portion of my team back at EVgo, was kind of the first flag we built charging stations under. Have worked under several different flags, directly and indirectly, and built about 1,500 sites across the country over those 15 years. We've participated in all aspects of site development, from acquiring sites on the front end to designing user experiences to actually supporting and operating sites. So we've kind of seen the whole gambit of charging stations and charging infrastructure. About 4 years ago, we kind of turned our focus to fleets. We found fleets to be intriguing because their high and predictable utilization really creates good economic outcomes when it comes to utilization and scalability of infrastructure. So for us, that was an attractive economic alternative. It also, I think, addresses a key challenge that a lot of public charging has, which is getting to high and predictable utilizations to make the economics work for them. And since then, our focus really has been on designing, building, operating, and maintaining charging infrastructure for fleets. We take a bit of a unique approach. We're very use case focused when we think about designing fleet infrastructure, really understanding how the vehicles are used, how far they drive, how long they park, their energy demands in terms of designing that infrastructure. And then we also like to take a modular approach to deployment such that we really create the flexibility to expand over time, reconfigure when necessary, and even relocate when necessary. We find that fleets in particular often are operating on leased property, which kind of makes the infrastructure challenge a little bit greater for them, especially when they find a need to really do on-premise charging as opposed to off-premise charging solutions. So that's kind of my background. Been driving EVs for, gosh, I guess 14 years now. Had 4 or 5 different ones over time. Really, I'm a passionate about the industry. Love the technology, and most importantly, it's just fun work with great people.
I've got to agree on a lot of those points. I am curious. It's so interesting to look at the customer forward EVs that are coming, but like you were saying, there's so much impact to be had with fleets. There's a lot of good
Yeah.
business cases to make with electrifying a fleet, and obviously you saw that there was a market to step into to provide a service. A whole business model. Do you see like a different adoption rate versus
Mhm.
customer versus fleet? What do you see looking forward? Are fleets just going to be electric, or do we need a lot
Yeah.
of good case studies to really convince people? How is the market?
Yeah, the fleets we talk to are eager to electrify. I think the biggest challenge they have is there's got to be a strong economic business case for it. And to date, that I think has been the biggest challenge to fleet adoption. I guess the root of that problem today really starts with the vehicle, really cost effective. Um, the heart of the fleet market is really trucks and vans. If you look at the counts that run around your neighborhoods every day, delivering packages or delivering services. And to date, we really haven't had an economic 200 plus mile range, appropriately sized truck and van. We've got the Rivian van, which is a fabulous van, and if you're doing high volume package delivery in your Amazon, you can afford to spend $80,000 to $90,000 in a van. A lot of other businesses we talk to, again, eager to do it, but don't yet see the economics as compelling. And I think in large part that's because automakers have focused on consumers. Consumer adoption is much stronger than fleet adoption, largely because that's where the auto OEMs have kind of placed their bets and their strategy right now. And in particular, I think on the high end, most EVs have turned out to be more consumer luxury vehicles. I think we're seeing a change in that now. We're seeing some more affordable uh, vehicles that can hit more segments of the market. I do think that will naturally transition into more fleet offerings that are going to make sense for these businesses. But again, for these businesses, it's not a brand thing. It's an economic thing. The numbers have to work out, and that's our single biggest challenge with fleets today.
I have heard that. I can imagine that. And if you're going to implement a whole system, new system of operation with the charging, with different kind of cars and just a different kind of operations, yeah, it has to be a
Yeah,
pretty convincing offer. And
yeah,
we're
yeah.
we're on our way there, but we're not quite there yet.
Yeah, it's a big change. I find the fleets are more comfortable with the vehicle than the charging. The vehicle is kind of a vehicle. It's got some subtleties around battery life and parts and things they have to be concerned about. But charging is really completely new. Most businesses kind of jettisoned on-premise fueling a long time ago. I mean, years ago, you'd find gas pumps, in the back
Yeah.
of fleet intensive businesses. Some still do that, but for the most part, they kind of got out of that. And now it's
Mm.
coming back in a completely different way where not only is it on premise fueling, it's a completely different mechanism of power.
And that option of either we're leasing or renting a space or
Yeah.
we're owning
Yeah.
it. I mean, it gets
It's
complicated.
lots of complexities, no doubt. Yeah.
Yeah, we've talked about real estate here and there a bit, and how
Yeah.
making sure you either have the potential to put that in the future, or you have it on your real estate, your property. That's going to become more and more valuable.
It is, yeah. The intersection of real estate and power is a very interesting area right now. Yeah.
It sure is. Okay, well, really great. It makes sense
Yeah,
that you are so well versed in these plug-in access methods for EV charging that we're going to talk about today. So Autocharge Plus and Plug and Charge, and you're, going to be advising your customers on the options that are not only, in the works but that are available right now, kind of helping them again to understand maybe this part of things. People can figure out how to drive an electric vehicle. It's a
yeah,
vehicle, but charging it, especially at large scale with fleets, it's a whole nother challenge. So I'm
yeah.
looking forward to hearing from you today about Autocharge
Sure.
Plus, or we might refer to it as Autocharge. Forgive us,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
just
yeah,
might roll off the tongue. But and Plug and Charge, both of which, as probably a lot of our listeners know, let you plug in, begin charging, pay for your session without interacting with the station directly necessarily, besides plugging your EV in and you don't have to open an app. It's a lot like
yeah.
what Tesla owners
Hmm.
have been experiencing and
Absolutely.
experience today on the network. So, can you start by telling me what are the primary options available today? I know that obviously we have Autocharge Plus, we have Plug
Yeah,
and Charge. Why is it whittled down to these two, or are there
yeah.
others that we should be paying attention to?
Yeah, so to your point, auto charge and plug-in charge are really just two plug-in access authorization methods. There's obviously a lot of other authorization methods, whether those are NFC, RFID, credit card, app, a whole bunch of others. Why do these matter? Well, plug-in access methods are just so convenient for drivers. They enable a single action on a single operable component. And not only are they easier for drivers, they're actually easier for the charging guys as well because if all I have to have is the connector, I don't have to worry about RFID readers and credit card readers and apps. It simplifies things a lot for both the driver and the charge point owner. As you mentioned, Tesla had the first plug-in access charging service in 2011. They had a proprietary CAN bus identification of the vehicle that would allow them to access the supercharger network. And really, with the standardization of NACS now by multiple automakers, the supercharger network now supports the plug and charge access method with a growing number of OEMs. And if you're an OEM and you want your vehicles to have plug-in access to the Tesla supercharger network, you will have to support plug and charge. So that certainly put a lot more momentum behind plug and charge with the NACS adoption of it. I think a number of automakers who aren't not ready for plug and charge are looking at auto charge as an alternative. So that's really the second of those plug-in access methods. There are other approaches to it that have been contemplated. I'd say none of them have really gained momentum yet to the extent that plug and charge and auto charge have. Of course, it's still early, right? And there's some major players in the payment processing industry that I would argue are still in the periphery that have great scale, great innovation, and great technology that could certainly come to bear here. So just the fact we've kind of narrowed to these two, and even I think the OEMs largely have put a lot of momentum behind plug and charge. The game is not over yet. I don't believe. I think other alternatives could certainly emerge from the likes of Visa, Mastercard, and others over time. In the same way that magstripe cards evolved to chip cards evolved to contactless evolved to Apple Pay, right? So I think there's similar types of things that could evolve over time. But for now, I think plug and charge certainly has the momentum of the industry, and auto charge is acting kind of as a stopgap for good or for bad right now.
Okay.
Yeah,
And let's get into the weeds of it, I guess.
sure,
So
absolutely.
essentially, I mean, we can start simply that, okay, I'm plugging my electric vehicle into a charging station and
Yeah,
communication is going on so that the whoever's providing me the electricity knows technically like who I am, but more specifically who's paying for this
yeah,
session.
yeah,
And but from the customer side of things, I'm like,
yeah,
okay, I'm being identified correctly. I'm being charged correctly and I'm getting the charge that I
yeah,
want. So what's going on? What's the
yeah,
difference? How could it be that different on
yeah.
the back end?
So why don't we talk about each auto charge and plug and charge separately because they're different. They kind of act the same from a consumer perspective, but under the covers are quite a bit different. With auto charge, the charger is using the identity of your vehicle to provide access to charging services, and the identity of your vehicle is specifically being provided by the MAC address of the charging communications module that's installed in your vehicle. So if every device has a MAC address, and that's usually how we identify it, whether it's your mobile phone or your laptop or your headsets or whatever, they all have MAC addresses. And so really the charger is using the MAC address to identify the vehicle, and then it takes that identity and goes and finds the payment that is associated with that vehicle. So it's not really a payment method itself, just to be clear. It's not, PCI, if you know that term from the credit card processing industry. We're not transmitting a payment token. We're transmitting an identity, and that identity is being mapped to a form of payment that's usually stored on the network, like a credit card, right? So you'll register your vehicle with a network like EVgo, and with that you'll put a credit card against it. And when EVgo identifies your car, it'll say, "Okay, well I'm going to put it on this credit card." Really, Autocharge is similar to how a lot of retailers, like say Starbucks, use the MAC address of your laptop or your phone to provide access to you when you walk in the store. You register once, you walk in any Starbucks, you turn on your laptop, you've got instant access. And that, again, being done in a similar manner by kind of looking at the MAC address of that device. The advantage of Autocharge is it's really simple. Every device has an inherent MAC address. It's a required element of every communications layer. It's always going to be there. In theory, it is a globally unique identifier of the vehicle. It doesn't contain any personally identifiable information, PII or PCI, payment card information. So there's not a lot of things to worry about there. So again, simple, easy, accessible. A few weaknesses of Autocharge. The MAC, that address itself is in no way digitally secured, so it could be spoofed. It's not as easy as spoofing an RFID card. It would require you building a piece of hardware, to plug the charger in, to plug it into your car, to kind of be a man in the middle to intercept it and send a different address. But in theory, it can be spoofed. It doesn't have as much digital protection behind it as other methods. Secondly, it's identifying the vehicle. It's not really identifying a payment party. So you're going to have to register your device with different networks. You have to have different accounts. And provide payment methods for each of those accounts. So it doesn't have a central clearinghouse. It's kind of I call it a one card multiple account method. Back in the EVgo days, we had something called no charge to charge. You could have one card and you'd register with multiple networks, and you had an account on each network. So similarly, you'll have to have an account with each network. So that's a little bit of a hassle. And then third, the MAC address itself, while it is a unique number, it doesn't contain any information. It's not like a VIN. It's not going to tell you the make, model, and year of the car, which can be valuable for understanding a lot of things as a charge point operator about what's going on with the car. So, that's a little bit about Autocharge. Simple, easy everywhere, but does have a few drawbacks you got to be concerned about.
I think it's interesting that EVgo moved in developing Autocharge, correct? Can you tell me a little bit more about why specifically what led to the birth of Autocharge, and what's the significance of EVgo
Yeah.
creating it?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, I remember from my time at EVgo, we were doing RFID cards, and you don't appreciate the logistical difficulty of RFID cards when you're managing them, operating them, and issuing them. So I think for us, early on, we really saw plug-in access as key to the user experience and really key to the simplification of the operations as well. So it was important to us, but we weren't seeing the auto manufacturers move quickly on anything related to plug and charge. This would have been back in the 2011 to 2014 days. And we saw Tesla has plug-in access, and no one else had it. So I think at the time, I think we may have worked with ABB to kind of figure out how do we use this piece of information and get it back to the charger so we can use it as a payment method. So it was really born out of necessity, and I think trying to be competitive with the alternatives that were out there at the time. And since then, I think it's kind of spread as an industry standard. We did work at the time of trying to find an approach to have a central clearinghouse, but we really couldn't get agreement amongst multiple CPOs on things like non-repudiation and escalated issues and how that would all work. So we've really not gotten to a central entity. Probably still an opportunity to look if there is a way to approach that problem. But that's what I remember of how EVgo kind of it was out of necessity at the end of the day.
Yeah, I remember. I mean, I wasn't there at that same time, but having worked at EVgo, I do remember. Yeah, it's like, well, we're not exactly ready as an industry for plug and charge. So this is what we have. Is
Yeah.
EVgo the only charge point operator implementing auto charge at this
Oh,
time?
no. I think almost any operator, well, in particular, if you're an operator, you have kind of a CPMS backend, and most of the CPMS backends now support auto charge. So it's pretty common. Again, it's something that's completely in the charge point owner's control. They're not dependent on the automaker to adopt anything or do anything or bless anything.
Mhm.
So you can move independently, which is, I think, why EVgo was able to get moving quickly on a solution while we kind of waited for the industry to figure out what it was going to do.
Mhm.
And that, that we're 10 plus years later, and plug and charge is just beginning to come into its own now.
Right. Yeah, so it does seem like in a good way, it's a Band-Aid, it's a stopgap, it's a way to
Yes.
make this immediate access to charging available, but because it is a Band-Aid, because it is the
Yeah.
stopgap, it does have these security risks, it has its limitations, it's maybe just not the perfect solution, but would you say compared to it that plug and charge is a perfect solution?
No, no, plug and charge is far from perfect either, but it's different, right? It's better in some ways and it's worse in others. So I think the difference with plug and charge is the charger is using a digital contract as opposed to this inherent MAC address that's proactively transmitted by the vehicle to provide access to charging services. The contract is in the form of an industry standard security certificate, which is based on technologies used in the internet today to secure communication. So it's a well-known, well-understood, well-adopted technology, and the vehicle will proactively send this contract to the charger, and the contract, instead of identifying the vehicle, identifies the entity who's responsible for payment of charging services. So it's a very distinctive thing to think about, right? The MAC address is identifying the vehicle. The contract is identifying who is responsible for payment. So when you're using the MAC address, you have to figure out who's responsible for payment, right? When you're using plug and charge, you have to figure out the identity of the vehicle because really you don't know. Right now, today contracts are one-to-one with vehicles, so you may be able to make an assumption for the moment that because I get this contract, it is with that vehicle. But as contracts get multiple vehicles, it again, and contract switch. I may replace a contract. Suddenly, the identifier I was using has been exchanged, added, changed, and therefore it may not reliably identify the vehicle over time.
Interesting. Okay, so it does seem that it might be. Can you talk a bit more? Like, why is this technically more secure than, or what are the steps that are in place
Yeah.
to make it more secure than Autocharge?
So I think a few things. The security certificate itself has ciphers and keys in it that secure the data in a way that everybody agrees to, that the industry has agreed to, that the internet's agreed to. So I think the certificate itself secures that data, and then additionally, the certificate itself is being transmitted over a secured channel between the charger and the EV. Right. So the charger and the EV create a secure communications channel, much like a browser and a server create an SSL channel. It's very identical. They're creating a secure communications channel, and then this certificate, which allows for what they call it non-repudiation, right? If the certificate validates, then that is the party, right? And that party can't
Mhm.
say it wasn't me, right? So it's difficult, or I'll never say it's impossible, but it's extremely difficult to spoof it. Unlike say an RFID card, which I can very easily spoof.
Mhm.
So I think those two elements really create a higher level of security for what I'll call data at rest and data in transmission to ensure that that identity of that entity who's responsible for payment cannot be easily spoofed or easily replaced.
Can you tell me a bit more about the prevalence of plug and charge compared to Autocharge in the industry right now?
Yeah, I would say right now, um, plug and charge is just getting started. Right now the first network to really adopt plug and charge was Electrify America, with a handful of vehicle manufacturers. I think first out of the gate were probably Ford, Porsche, Volkswagen. But from other work I'm doing right now, every auto manufacturer is on a path to plug and charge. It may take until 2026 model year, 2027 model year to get there, but everybody is on this path. It requires changes in hardware and processes. There's a lot of change for the auto manufacturer to implement it, so it is a big investment. It takes time, but I would say all the automakers I interact with certainly are on that path right now, although not many of them have gotten started, right? There's still just a handful that have really gotten started. And on the network side, I don't know of any network beyond Electrify America that's yet adopted plug and charge, but Tesla has, right? If you're using you can use your F-150 or your Rivian and do plug and charge with Tesla. So Tesla has begun rolling it out on their side.
Interesting. It's I feel like we can be a little impatient at times in this industry because we're watching it all
Yeah.
happen live, like a live experiment. But it does seem like from everyone I speak to about almost everything, the ball's rolling, but it might be rolling a little bit slowly.
Yeah, and when you're frustrated in front of a charger because you're swiping an app or your card doesn't work, it can't come
Mhm.
fast enough, right? I mean,
So true.
most charging session failures these days fail before you get to power flow. Something happens in that initial interaction. And from my perspective, like with my F-150, um, plug and charge success is very high. Not as high
Mhm.
as my Tesla. My Tesla, I have about 100% charge success rate on.
Mhm.
But plug and charge with an F-150 is much more successful than app start or credit card start with an F-150. So I think it does have the potential to clean up a lot of challenges in the industry in terms
Mhm.
of kind of charge success rate and that pre-power flow period.
Certainly, and that reminds me of, when I would be at EVgo and we would, talk to potential automaker partners or automaker partners about the stats of Autocharge and how there are those issues that happen before, like you're saying, the power gets flowing
They do.
for whatever reason that are then, crop down a whole bunch when you have this automated system built in like
Yeah.
Autocharge.
Yeah.
And, one challenge well, I guess one advantage of auto charge is like you're saying, like this independence to be able to move not only as like CPO EVgo, but also if I want to auto charge on the EVgo network and I have a unique MAC ID or my EV has a unique MAC ID, pretty simple. I can do it. But with plug
Yep.
and charge, like you've mentioned, the automakers kind of control the digital
They do.
certificates that are installed on the vehicles. Can you tell me a bit more about that complexity there?
Yeah, yeah. So I think there are a couple of downsides to plug and charge. One of them, I'll say, their complexity and control. So the complexity side is the process for creating, installing, managing, transmitting, validating certificates is complex. It's not easy. It's well known, but it is complex. And behind that, each charging network must have a bilateral relationship with each payment entity who's going to process the certificates. So that creates a lot of things that have to get done, and that's why the adoption process for the OEMs does take time. But the second element that you kind of bring up is control. Right now, the auto OEMs control the installation of security certificates on the vehicle. There is one exception, with the singular exception of BMW. You, as the vehicle owner, can't select which contract gets installed or which contract gets used. BMW is the first one I've seen, at least, that allows you to choose amongst some certificates you want to install, and at the time of your charging session, pick the one you want to use. So there is an element of user choice, on the horizon. But right now, for all other auto manufacturers, they control which security or which contract certificate goes on the vehicle, and as a result, your vehicle manufacturer now controls the processing of your charging payments in a plug and charge world. So I think that's a downside that um, if you're a consumer, you like choice, so you kind of have lost a little bit of choice there. And then if you're a charge point operator, payment processing and account relationship doesn't live with you anymore. It lives with the auto manufacturer, where the contract certificate is. You're a processor of a payment. You're kind of passing through the payment, but you're really not. You really don't. You're not the retailer who shows up on the customer's credit card statement anymore. That'll be Ford or Porsche or Volkswagen, who are actually the retailers who are processing those payments.
So it seems like the implications here are for the customer, unless you're maybe driving a BMW, and I'd love to hear a bit more like examples of what exactly that would be like to choose my certificates,
Mhm.
but I
Sure.
I have less choice. The automakers have more control, and as a charge point operator, when I'm selling those electrons, I have less relation to the customer exactly
Mhm.
or the
Yeah.
process going on, which could
Yeah.
obviously be valuable to me for whatever reason as a charge point operator. Do I have those
Yep.
implications right from your
Yeah,
point of
I,
view?
I think strategically, as a charge point operator, you may see this as, what a weight off of me. I don't have to worry about apps and RFID cards and all this. They just plug in and I get paid. Some charge point operators may love that. Other charge point operators may be looking to build a very deep customer relationship, and they want to have an app. They want to have digital NFC cards. They want to have these deep relationships, and they're I think more likely to be laggards in adoption because it's not necessarily consistent with their strategy on that side.
And
To your
they don't
yeah, go ahead,
sorry.
Francie. Sorry.
They don't
No, go ahead.
necessarily know the EV that you're driving, right, with plug and charge.
They don't. Now, don't get me wrong, you still get the MAC address comes across, right? So you can still uniquely identify the car, but you're not going to be able to necessarily determine the make and model. Um, at this time, right now, since you know largely it's a one certificate per vehicle world, and that certificate is issued and known by the auto manufacturer, you can often look at the entity who's responsible for payment in the contract certificate and determine this must be a Ford, because if the certificate says Ford, this hierarchical structure means that it's a Ford of some sort. So in today's world, just because of the one-to-one relationship, you can directionally identify the car based on the certificate, but that's not going to be a scalable solution, and it doesn't get you to anything beyond it's a Ford, right? You don't know if it's a Mach-E or an F-150, what model year, you don't know anything else.
Mhm. I can imagine for, like, data collection and diagnostics that
Exactly, right.
is
Yeah,
valuable.
it's so valuable to have, right? It's just so valuable to know the make, model, and year of a vehicle really helps you understand when things go wrong, what went wrong. It's very, very powerful to have.
Based on these kind of list of and do you remember your thought that I interrupted? I wanna
Well, I was going to talk about BMW. You mentioned the BMW Experience. I can
Yes,
talk a little bit
please.
about it. So through the app, you can choose from one of maybe two or three different certificate options to install on your vehicle. Um, I don't remember specifically who those were issued by, and then when you pull up to a station, you can choose which certificate of those installed you want to use for this charging session. Now, you can't install anybody's certificate, and BMW gets to choose who plays. Right? They don't necessarily say anybody who meets these criteria is welcome to install the certificate. They choose which certificates will be allowed. So I wouldn't exactly call it full consumer choice, but it certainly is kind of a step in a direction that would provide more consumer choice. It doesn't at all deal with the charge point operator situation. They're still not a part of the transaction unless, of course, they are providing the certificate. But you can imagine, in another world, you having a WEX certificate for your fleet fueling and a Chase certificate for your personal fueling, right? You might have different certificates, or hey, I might get points if I use my Shell certificate at this station. So there's all sorts of things that you might choose as a customer to do if you did have that choice. But today, that choice, I would argue, is none or extremely limited.
Mhm. Yeah, it's hard to imagine a day when I have a bunch of choices, but then I start to think, "Oh, I'd love for that to be automated, that they just pick
Yeah,
the right
exactly.
one for me
Yeah,
based on but that I can override
location.
if I want."
Yeah, yeah,
Mhm. Exactly,
yeah.
location. So, complex, both of these, have their advantages and disadvantages. So, for the various stakeholders that could be taking advantage of these fleets, retailers, consumers, when it comes to Autocharge and Plug and Charge, how do you determine or how do you advise or how should
Hmm.
someone determine whether auto charge or plug and charge is the best fit for their use case? Maybe you could provide some examples where each method would be ideal
Yeah.
or absolutely not ideal.
Yeah, no, I think to your point, it is kind of use case driven, and I think I'll give an example as a fleet, right? I don't see a lot of value with fleets going to plug and charge, right? You're typically in a behind the fence application. You're not exchanging money, but you are very interested in understanding what vehicle is plugged into what charger and what is its situation, right? That's very valuable to you. So using that auto charge token to identify and authorize vehicles for charging can be very powerful in a fleet environment. Um, uh, I don't see too many applications of plug and charge in the fleet space unless for some reason you are providing shared services. So if you were operating, say, an off-premise fleet depot that was providing services to multiple parties, and you're actually doing um, exchange of funds in individual transactions, then it might be useful. But generally, I find for those situations, the charging is going to be kind of aggregated to the end of the month and invoiced to the party as opposed to done on an individual transaction basis. So I think fleet high benefits and plug and charge benefits, trade off for the complexity. Sorry, high benefits and auto charge trade off for the complexity and plug and charges, and is great. I think if you are a public facing, large scale CPO, you're probably trying to build customer relationships. Those are probably important to you strategically. and you may prefer Autocharge for just that reason. It could be one of the reasons that EVgo and I think also ChargePoint haven't adopted plug and charge, right? They see Autocharge as meeting the same customers' needs, but allowing them to be in the transaction and maintain the customer relationship. So I think for those guys that they're going to have the scale to build apps and to build unique user experiences and scale to process payments. So that might make more sense for them. If you're a small mom and pop operator and you've got a few charging stations installed, you may find that the simplest path is plug and charge. It's easily accepted. You plug it in, it works. It's simple. I don't have to worry about a lot of complexity and the customer saying I'm swiping and it isn't starting or this card isn't working. They plug it in, it authorizes, it works, you get paid. You may find that to be very simple and attractive. So I mean, those are a few examples, but I think every situation is kind of different. Every use case is. I would say credit cards may seem expensive, but they're ubiquitous, secure, and fully in your control as a CPO, right? Some people, a lot of people don't want to deal with credit cards, but honestly, contactless payment in the age of Apple and Google Pay is really easy. Just hold it up and it works. So
Mhm.
I don't want to rule those out. RFID may seem really simple, but it's got a lot of logistical challenges and it's got a lot of security challenges. So it really just depends on your specific situation. To us, it's all about the use case. It's really understanding the use case and the business strategy as to picking what authorization methods that you want to support. And what we tell customers is, that needs to be an informed and conscious business decision. Don't let the selection of payment methods be defaulted to whatever the offerings are or the preferences are of your hardware network provider. That should be decision criteria that you're making going into those decisions, not a result of the decisions that you make.
Hmm. Interesting. I mean, I start to see like, okay, this auto charge could fit this use case, plug and charge could fit this use case. Is there a day when these things could mesh up together and make a perfect solution? Or is it inherently have to be
Yeah,
kind of separate?
yeah. I think if I know, I think they can work together, right? Because the MAC address identifies a vehicle, a unique vehicle that's valuable, has its purpose. Um, the plug and charge allows a payment entity to be identified independent of the network. That's got value too. To me, if we kind of expanded choice on plug and charge to give consumers choice on plug and charge, and if we could, combine that with the vehicle identification of auto charge, I think the two actually work hand in hand pretty well to accomplish different tasks. The one we're still missing, I think, is how do I accurately identify a vehicle? Right? How do I know the make, model, and year? I know people get sticky about VINs as being PI, personally identifiable information. To me, you don't have to go all the way to the VIN. If you can just know the make, model, and year, if you're trying to really understand how your site's being used and you're trying to root cause problems, it's incredibly powerful. It would be great to find something in the 15.11.8 protocol that we could leverage that allows us to communicate make, model, and then again will require automaker cooperation, and they may not want to do that.
And
Yeah.
speaking of automakers, I have seen, I mean, maybe this has just existed kind of forever, but the automakers love to keep their customers within their brand ecosystem. So that means within
Yes.
their app, within their
Yep.
websites, you don't need to go over there. Stay with us. Stay right over
Yes.
here.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
can you speak to maybe like the intentional positioning of automakers to
Mhm.
control maybe the payment processing through systems like plug and charge?
Yeah. Yeah.
What is the greater impact of this? Also, what are the motivations behind that from what you can see?
Yeah. I mean, it's no secret that the auto industry is trying to move to a services model, right? They want you to pay a subscription fee for heated seats. So certainly one of the single largest services for a vehicle is fueling, right? Fueling and insurance are two big ones, obviously. So I could argue, while I don't know, and I'm not in the strategy sessions of automakers, it certainly makes sense to me that plug and charge is a method by which the automakers can kind of gain some level of control over the fueling activities of vehicles of the future. And strategically, I- maybe it's coincident, maybe causal though that they're all behind plug and charge because it does provide a single point of control that allows them to essentially grab hold of a very large value stream of all. Not just I'm not just selling the vehicle. Now I'm selling all the fuel that goes with the vehicle and all the services that goes with the vehicle. And how do I get hold of the insurance to go with that? Right. If I was an automaker, I'd certainly be looking at how do I bundle that all together.
Mm, interesting. And of course, we've talked a little bit about how this would maybe worry or be a relief to charge point operators. Either I have less hands on and that's good, or
Right.
actually, no, I want to keep my hands on this customer. Maybe customer choice is limited. And you also brought up Visa and MasterCard before. And
Mhm.
there's also other entities that are interested in how these transactions will be rolling out. Can you
Absolutely.
enlighten me a little bit more about what you meant there with bringing those
Well,
in earlier?
yeah, I mean, there are companies who, payment processing companies who support the fuels industry, right? And it's a very complex ecosystem of different roles of different parties to take your credit card to the pump and get it paid for. Whether that's pricing or points or loyalty or all sorts of there's an entire system around that. And obviously, this is very disruptive to that system. Right, is paying the fuels payment industry is a big industry. I don't know the exact number. It's got to be many billions of dollars, and those who are processing those payments today certainly would like to continue processing those payments tomorrow and in the future world of EVs. So exactly what they're going to do, I don't know, but I have to believe that they're thinking about how their strategy fits into a plug and charge world or a different world. To me, there's no reason that a vehicle couldn't provide a true payment token, just like say a phone does, like Apple Pay. It's actually transmitting you basically load a virtual credit card on your phone and it transmits a payment token, and the retailer processes that payment just like a credit card. Certainly, no reason a vehicle couldn't do the same thing. At the end of the day, if my Apple Watch can present a payment, I'm certain we can get the technology on a vehicle to do the same thing. But again, the automakers are have to want to do that. They have to be motivated to really want to be a part of what I would think is a very large payment system today, as opposed to potentially creating a parallel payment system that they've got more control over.
Interesting. Yeah, I feel like we can kind of step back and start to remember, oh, there's a lot of parties that are interested in this. And just like you said, yeah, the global fuel market
It's
was
huge.
valued at yeah, nearly 700 billion in
Okay,
2022.
even
So
bigger. Yeah.
I
Big.
mean, yeah, I mean that is absolutely giant. So it is very I mean, that's obvious. People are interested in figuring that out. And I think, yeah, about Apple CarPlay, we already Apple's, it's already in the
It's there.
car. So how
It
hard can it
is.
be? But it is the willingness and the strategy behind it, like you were saying.
Yeah, no, exactly, exactly. And it may be great for the customer, but there's obviously other factors at work as to how this comes together over time.
So it seems like automakers and networks are moving to fully support plug and charge. It seems to be kind of like the North Star right now, although we know that things could switch up. Things get switched up all the time in this
Well,
industry. There's a lot of potential. Mhm.
absolutely. I mean, I think the automakers certainly are aligned behind it. I can't speak for the networks as much. I mean, I don't see the same level of universal support moving forward. Um, so we'll see. We'll see. Again, the beauty of auto charge is you don't need the OEM's cooperation. You can do it without them. The beauty of plug and charge is it creates some more simplicity for the user at the end of the day, but it may not be in the strategic interest of the network. So I think broad and visible support from the automakers for plug and charge. I'd say more sporadic support right now. I don't know that the networks are convinced this is in their best interest yet.
I see that, and it seems like, okay, the automakers, like you mentioned, there's hardware, there's software, there's a lot of,
Big
changes that need
investment.
to be made to support it. Yeah, big
Yeah,
investment.
yeah,
Charge point operators have investments as well.
absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
it's is there we haven't really talked about standardization exactly, but I know
Mhm.
that this
Sure.
gets brought up. So plug and charge, right, of standardization in the EV industry in general, we're
Yeah.
waiting on a lot of it to happen. Some of it has happened that we've been waiting on.
Yeah.
Where are we there? I know there's the
Mhm.
software, hardware changes that automakers have to do, but yeah, what about
Right.
standardization?
Yeah, so I think the beauty of Autocharge is it's been in the standard. It's kind of de facto in the lowest level of the standard around what's called the power line communication that sits underneath this whole thing. So it's always been there and it's always going to be there. So that's a really easy one. Plug and charge is built on the 15.11.8 standard, which I think is pretty mature and pretty. I mean, it's still got some things around the edges. I know 15.11.8.20 is coming out. It's going to do things like bidirectional flow and all sorts of other great stuff. But around plug and charge and payment processing, that the existing standard is in pretty good shape. So I don't think necessarily have a standards issue. I really think it is kind of investment. And thankfully, the investment to get to 15.11.8 On the charger side, from my perspective, most chargers, even a lot of L2 chargers today, support 15.11a. They may not yet have the software on board to take advantage of 15.11a. They may not have the software on board to process the certificates, but those are usually going to be software changes that can be made as opposed to hardware changes. The vehicle side is a little more challenging because it is a physical hardware change to move to plug and charge, to move a 15.11a vehicle versus a dense spec 7121 vehicle, I think it is. So different levels of difficulty, but I don't think we're awaiting any. I don't think we have a big standards challenge in 15.11.8 right now in order to support plug and charge. I'd also say that 15.11.8, it processes, technically it's called payment details, and in this case, it's in the form of a contract certificate. To me, there's no reason that payment details couldn't be in the form of something else. You could transfer a one-time use ephemeral PCI token. There's certainly other ways you could use the underlying 15.11.8 to do different forms of payment. It's not exclusive to plug and charge by any means.
I know that you obviously are well studied, well versed. You have the hands-on background for all of this. Do you participate in any other events or conferences or groups or associations where you can ideate about this with other people?
Um, I'm not currently on any of those boards. There certainly are several of those. The standards boards at the SAE level that are working on these are certainly kind of can be challenging places to go, but you can certainly learn a lot while you're there. There's also a group called Charin, which focuses on kind of building global standards. I find festivals or plug-in festivals they call them, where people are trying to understand how that's one of the best places to learn, just by being there and understanding what the challenges are and talking to people about what's working and what's not. I think if you really kind of want the hands-on and less of the academic, those festivals can be great places to kind of go really accelerate your learning and see what's going on in the real world.
Totally agree. I am like you've mentioned, it's a really cool space to work in. A lot of things change, and I've seen also certain reflections from other industries in the past in EV
Yeah.
charging. A lot of people have pointed to our telephone towers and cell
Hmm.
towers and
Hmm.
everything. But do
Yeah.
you see, we're in kind of this intermediary phase,
Hmm.
and things are changing. Do you see any sort of lessons that we can take from other industries or similar examples from other industries that we can apply to the EV charging space in this way?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the biggest challenges we have, in particular with public, I guess when I step back, consumer adoption of EVs, I think is going to get stuck next on infrastructure. Right? Is I think the cars are. We have lots of choices in cars. The costs are coming down. Now people's got to get confidence in the infrastructure, and we've yet to kind of establish that in terms of not only coverage but also reliability. So those feel like
Mhm.
two big things that need to get done. So I think in that vein, uh, you know, analogies to me is the economics right now. I think one of the biggest challenges to getting that coverage and reliability has to do with the economics. Is getting enough utilization on sites to drive the economics up. Where the lessons learned. Part of me is real estate. In some ways, charging is as much a real estate development play as it is a services play. A lot of times the value creation sits in the real estate itself, not in the assets you put on the real estate. I think that's been proven out across lots of different examples. I think your specific example in the cell tower industry is sharing infrastructure across multiple providers.
Mhm.
Kind of a little bit what plug and charge is doing. You go to a cell tower, it's a piece of real estate that's been developed that happens to get in a good intersection of land and power. Now the land is a different coverage as opposed to highway access or something. But and then ultimately, to get the economics working better, you're sharing with equipment or services from multiple providers on one piece of property. So that might be another analogy to think about.
Hmm.
But I do think our biggest challenge right now in terms of EV adoption, both at the consumer and the fleet level, has a lot to do with the economics. In the case of fleets, it includes more the vehicle economics. I think in the case of consumers, it's going to be can I get reliable, good coverage, cost-effective charging? And what does worry me is at low utilization levels, I'm seeing prices in the 60 cent per kilowatt hour range on some networks. That's pretty tough to stomach if that's your way of charging. Now, if you do that, 10% of your time because you charge at home for nothing, great. But if that's your primary means of charging, to me, that's probably gasoline equivalent to $6 a gallon. And unfortunately, you're kind of raising the cost of transportation materially um, down that path. So, I think we've got to find some creative approaches, and maybe they come from other industries. Maybe some of your analogies are good ones. Is what creative approaches can we find to improve those economics, increase that utilization? Because we're going to need to drive down the cost of this charging in order to really get the levels of adoption that we need to achieve as an industry.
Mm,
Sorry, I don't know
yeah.
if that's where you wanted to go, Francie,
No,
but
that's really interesting. No, I appreciate your insight there.
mm,
It's so true. I mean, there's one side of things where this has to be a business model that works and
yeah.
which is selling energy, and it's been hard. There's a lot of upfront
Hmm.
costs, and even with federal funding, that has its burdens as
Yeah.
well. And then, of course, if there's more charging stations, great. Hopefully, I can charge at home. But when I show up, I want it to work as an EV
Yeah.
driver, and
Exactly.
we're kind of having a little push and pull there right now, which is
We are.
unfortunate. And we of course showcase our road trips and how things, I mean, I've had a lot of great experiences on the road in both Tesla and CCS EVs, and those have been hopefully good examples that you can do it, but there's
Yeah.
definitely we can keep getting better and better. It's just how. Mm,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and to get better and better, it's got to have positive economics on its own. And I don't know
exactly.
if we're there yet. It's a high fixed cost business, and utilization is what it's all about.
I'd love to go to an economics course about EVs and the EV industry right now. That would be fun.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
of course, there's the challenges that we focus on that we must focus on because that's part of finding the solutions. What are you most excited for looking forward in the EV space?
I mean, for me personally, it really is fleets. I just think there's such an untapped opportunity around fleets. My vehicle sits still most of the day. It doesn't really drive that many miles a year. These fleet vehicles are driving every day, long distances. It's just a huge opportunity to get great economics, but more importantly, it makes a much bigger impact on emissions. Right? If we're talking about the reducing emissions, putting a 75 kilowatt hour battery in a fleet vehicle has much more impact than putting it in a personal vehicle. So personally, I'm very passionate about fleets. I think fleets are the best lever for us to pull as a society. I also think they're the best economic lever to pull as well. Again, back to that predictable and high utilization. But we've got to have vehicles that make economic sense. We've got to have essentially trucks and vans that have at least 200 miles of range and are kind of sub $50,000 to really make this section of the industry take off. Because these businesses, the bottom line has to pencil. Otherwise, it's simply not something they're going to do.
I think that's a big takeaway here. Bottom line. Thank you so much. I feel like
Yeah,
you
thank you.
very effectively laid out, plug and charge versus auto charge. What's the holdup? Also, what's the difference? Because on the customer side of things, hopefully it's just you're plugging in and you're
Yeah,
getting a reliable charge from a charger that is performing as expected, as is your EV, and then you can just carry on with your day. So I really
yeah,
appreciate your time, Glenn. Thank you.
yeah. Absolutely, it's great being with you today, Francie. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, of course. And if I'm looking forward to see what our audience thinks, how helpful this was for them to know what's going on the back end. I think a lot of EV drivers can do without all of the technical stuff,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
a lot of us are very interested in it and what is
I
happening
mean,
behind the scenes.
at the end of the day, you just want it to plug in and charge, and whether it's auto charge or
Exactly.
plug and charge, that is what you as a consumer get. So it's a
Yes,
win for the consumer either way.
that's very true. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Like you said, we're moving in certain direction. Automakers certainly are, but still there is potential to find
Absolutely.
solutions that work,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Again, thank you so much for coming on to the Out of Spec podcast today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Francine.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. Let us know your questions, your thoughts. Drive safely, stay charged, and we will see you next time. Bye bye.
Bye.